Hello there everybody, welcome back to the channel for Andor Season 2's characters that could be in the show video. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel for all the Andor coverage. We'll be covering every single episode, live streams, live reactions, Q&As with our fans, and of course our predictions videos, so keep an eye out on the channel for all of that. Comment below, let me know any of the characters that you think have the best chance of showing up in Andor Season 2, and let's just get into the video right now. So because Andor Season 2 takes place in the Dark Times, which is the gap between Revenge of the Sith and Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, it's one of the most densely packed parts of the Star Wars timeline, meaning kind of anybody could be in this show. Andor Season 2 is going to be released across 4 different weeks. Each week will have 3 episodes, completing 1 year of Cassian's story, leading up from the 4 BBY point to the 0 BBY point, which is where Rogue One takes place. We are literally going to be transitioning this story from Andor Season 1 all the way to Rogue One every single week. So I want to start with the top brass of the Rebels. Let's look at the Rebel leaders, the people who are important for the Rebel hierarchy and structure at this time and up to Rogue One. And let's start with one of the standouts from Rogue One itself, General Davitz Draven. General Draven is a character who has a significant role in Rogue One, and I think he absolutely will make an appearance in this show. Looking at the other top brass from the Rebel Alliance at this time, we of course have to mention Bail Organa. Jimmy Smits has come back so many times to Star Wars in the Disney reign. I would be shocked if Bail Organa does not show up in this show. He not only is a part of Rogue One, but along with Mon Mothma is one of the most important faces of the Rebel Alliance, both in canon and in Legends, and if not an appearance, he definitely will be name dropped at least once or twice. There are a lot of characters that go along with Bail Organa that could show up just by proxy of being around him. One of them is Captain Antilles, who obviously was recast and appears at the end of Rogue One after the hallway scene with Darth Vader. His daughter, Princess Leia, obviously another character who appears in Rogue One with a pretty bad CGI face. Then you have, of course, C-3PO and R2-D2, who do serve Captain Antilles and serve aboard the Tantive 4. Some other notable Rebel higher-ups from Rogue One, from that council scene specifically, who could show up in the show are Senator Tynra Palmo, Vas Vaspar, and Naur Jebel. And then militarily wise, you have Admiral Raddus, the Mon Calamari. Speaking of Mon Calamari, we could also see a younger Admiral Akbar. And then from the human side of the Rebel Alliance military, there's Crix Madine, General Dodona, who was recast for Rogue One and does make an appearance, and General Riken. We could look at some other Rebel military and pilots. In Rogue One, you do see the entirety of Red Squadron and Gold Squadron, including Red Leader and Gold Leader, bringing them over from Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, and we could absolutely see both characters again if there's a dogfight. Another major pilot who was introduced in Rogue One and was the leader of Blue Squadron until they were killed on Scarif was General Merrick. I think Merrick has a much higher probability of showing up in Andor Season 2 than either Red or Gold Leader. But if you did have Red or Gold Squadron, the closer we get to A New Hope, the more likely it is to see characters like a Wedge Antilles, like a Biggs Darklighter, like a Jack Porkins, or even our Red 5 from Rogue One, Pedron Gall, could make an appearance in this show. On the ground, you have, of course, Pow and Biston, who were iconic from Rogue One, and then a returning character who did make an appearance in Season 1 in the Narkina 5 episodes of Andor Season 1, Melshi, who I think will absolutely show up in this show. We could also have some appearances from some notable background characters who later got a little bit more to their story, like Derek Hobby Clivian, Wes Jansen, Dak Ralter, or Zev Sineska. On the other side of the Rebel Alliance, we have to talk about Star Wars Rebels, which of course takes place concurrently with Andor Season 2, but directly from the trailers of Andor Season 2, we know that it's going to be dealing with the Gorman Massacre, which is a big plot point from Star Wars Rebels involving Mon Mothma. We know that Mon Mothma especially, but a lot of other Rebel characters intersect with the Rebel cell that we see operating in Star Wars Rebels. There's enough crossover, and especially enough crossover in the time period, that I expect at least some name drops, if not full-on cameos from a lot of the characters from Star Wars Rebels. That, of course, means Ezra Bridger, Hera Syndulla, Sabine Wren, Zeb Orrelios, and Kanan Jarrus, as well as everybody's favorite murderbot, Chopper. I think it's absolutely on the table we see the Ghost at some point, and maybe Hera highlighting it. The big one that we haven't seen, though, is Kanan Jarrus. I think Freddie Prinze Jr. could absolutely be a live-action Kanan Jarrus. He has stated in the past that he's done with Star Wars. He doesn't really intend on ever coming back to Star Wars, but with a little bit of money, I think anybody would show back up for a role. We saw Harrison Ford do it in The Rise of Skywalker, and if you can get Harrison Ford, you definitely can get Freddie Prinze Jr. I think especially Hera and Kanan making a little appearance, maybe just for a meetup or a conversation. Mary Elizabeth Winstead can play a Hera from Star Wars Rebels. Sabine and Ezra would be a little bit more difficult considering they have aged a significant amount, Ezra especially, but if you did a little bit closer to the 0 BBY point, which is when Star Wars Rebels does end in its final season, Iman Asfandi has already played that version of Ezra who leaves the hologram message for Sabine, so we could see him if it's a little bit closer to A New Hope. Natasha Liu Bordizzo could absolutely play both versions of Sabine. I just don't think Sabine makes as much sense for this story, but since the Rebels crew were so tight-knit, since the Ghost crew were so tight-knit, don't really see some side adventure that we didn't see in the show existing in Andor, so I think it would be some type of crisscross, some type of moment like the moment where they have Mon Mothma aboard the Ghost, where you see some type of trade-off there, and just in the background you see maybe Kanan standing there, or Hera. Some other notable characters from Rebels that could make appearances: Ryder Azadi, who did make a small appearance in live action in Ahsoka. Commander Sato, I think, is another big one. I think Commander Sato actually has a solid chance of showing up in the show. There's also the pilot Martin Matten, and then of course the clones, Rex, Wolf, Gregor. Could we see live action late stage of Dark Times clones? Going along with the clones, one of the first groups of people you would think about obviously would be the Bad Batch. The Bad Batch season 3 ends with an epilogue where an older Omega does intend to join up with the Rebel Alliance. This is, however, after A New Hope. Who's to say that the Bad Batch didn't help out at some point in some of the early Rebel problems? And then continuing along the animation line, Cassian's affiliation with the Separatists does leave a lot of different pieces open for connections in the future. Maybe Separatists coming out of hiding. Another character who's mostly notable for Star Wars The Clone Wars, and I think actually has a really strong shot of being in this season, is Lux Bonteri. Lux Bonteri was the son of a Separatist senator, but the thing that makes me think he actually could be in the show is that he allied himself with Saw and Stila Guerrera during the Onderon conflict of the Clone Wars. Later on in his life, he did reacquaint himself with Saw, and tenuously sometimes worked with the Partisans, and eventually became a part of the Dreamers group, which was the group that the Partisans kind of transformed into after Saw dies in Rogue One, and is mostly seen in the book Battlefront Inferno Squadron. And finally, from the Senate, we could see Rio Chuchi, a Pantoran senator from Star Wars The Clone Wars, and then eventually Star Wars The Bad Batch, who is heavily involved in getting clones the rights they deserve after the Clone Wars. Let's look at some Imperials now, because there are also a significant number of Imperials who could show up in the show. Right off the bat, we have the obvious ones like Darth Vader or Palpatine. Nothing from Andor has really gone into the Force side of Star Wars, and I don't really see it going there now. So to me, that rules Darth Vader out a little bit, but because he was in Rogue One, I think there's a possibility he shows up. But one I've speculated on a lot is Emperor Palpatine, because we see a scene in Andor Season 2 where Mon Mothma is speaking to the Senate, and we see that center pod, that Emperor's pod. Does that mean we see Palpatine? Most of the time, Palpatine didn't concern himself with appearing in the Imperial Senate. He was a dictator, and the Senate was kind of just for looks, to make people feel like they actually had some voice and some rights. I think it would kind of be in character for Palpatine for him to not make any appearance in this show, to just kind of shrug everything we see in the show off as it's beneath him. But Ian McDiarmid has been coming back so often lately. I would love to see Palpatine. I always love to see Palpatine, especially in this time, because we don't see him often in the Dark Times. Character who is more likely to show up, especially in that center pod, is Masamita, the Grand Vizier, another member of the Imperial Ruling Council who could show up, and somebody who's standing right next to Palpatine when he turns the Republic into the Empire is Sly Moore. Let's look at the Imperial military, because there are a lot of characters who could show up. We know that Director Krennic is returning to the show from Rogue One, so I think the first character we have to talk about in conjunction with Krennic and the Death Star is Grand Moff Tarkin. We got the deepfake CGI version of Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. Do they go that route again? Do they decide to recast Grand Moff Tarkin? Do they go with the Revenge of the Sith actor? Do they go with the actor who played Tarkin underneath the deepfake CGI? Tarkin is so involved in the early days of the rebellion, in the late days of the dark times building up to A New Hope, obviously being one of the central villains, if not the central villain of A New Hope, and directly being involved in Rogue One. I think Tarkin is in the show. It'll just be interesting to see how he's in this show. If we want to look at that Imperial conference that's in A New Hope, that scene features the Chief of the Imperial Army, General Cassio Tag, the Chief of the Imperial Navy and Admiral of the Fleet, Conan Antonio Motti, General and Chief Moradim Bast, Imperial Security Bureau Colonel Wolf Yularen, who was recast and we did see in Andor Season 1. There was also General Trench Moloch, General Hurst Romedy, and Chief Seward Cass. Some other notable original trilogy Imperials who could show up are Yet, Veers, Jar Jarrod, other members of the Tag family, who is very prominent both in Legends comics and in Star Wars canon comics. And we could also look at the larger Star Wars canon, including Rebels, which features many prominent Imperials throughout the show. There is Arinda Price, who's one of the recurring antagonists throughout Star Wars Rebels. There's also Agent Callus, another recurring antagonist in Star Wars Rebels turned good guy at the end. Of course, there's Grand Admiral Thrawn. Thrawn is a character who I absolutely could see appearing in this show. I don't think it will be in a significant role. Thrawn's TIE Defender project directly interferes with the funding for the Death Star, and so there could be some scenes that do involve Thrawn, or at least maybe Thrawn underlings like an Eli Vanto or a Gilad Pellaeon. There's also another recurring Imperial in Rebels, Brom Titus, who could also make an appearance. Let's also look at Rogue One for a second here, because I put in the Imperial category the characters of Bodhi Rook and Galen Erso. I think both of these characters have a high likelihood of showing up in the show. I also think Galen Erso needs to be a big recurring character of this show. I think he's going to be one of the main ones that they've kept hidden, and Galen Erso is such a rich character, so heavily tied to the character of Orson Krennic, who seems to be a big part of Andor Season 2. If the Death Star is going to be a big focus of the show, I think Galen makes multiple appearances. There's also some other Imperials that exist throughout the extended canon. You of course have the Versio family, including Admiral Versio and his daughter Iden Versio. There's also Eliana Zara, who rose through the ranks of the Empire as the protege to Grand Moff Tarkin. Let's look at some of the Underworld characters who could appear in this show. This season does look like it's going to feature the Partisans a bit more, and they do deal with the Underworld a little bit more. If we go to Jeddah, there is obviously the characters of Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba, who make a little bit of a cameo in Rogue One. Characters who are out there and could make possible appearances. Again, I think it's very unlikely, but could make possible appearances are Han Solo, Chewbacca, Lando Calrissian, and Lobot, Enfys Nest and her Marauders, who do have their own resistance group in Solo: A Star Wars Story. There's Crimson Dawn and Kira, another connection to Solo: A Star Wars Story, as well as Maul, who does perish in Star Wars Rebels, but is alive during the first few arcs of Andor Season 2. Asajj Ventress and Cad Bane, both of whom are focuses of the new Tales of the Underworld. I don't see either of them being likely, but I think Cad Bane is the more likely of the two. Boba Fett and the other bounty hunters from The Empire Strikes Back, Dengar Bossk, IG-88 for LOM, and Zuckuss, and everybody's favorite pirate, Hondo Ohnaka. Another name I wanted to throw out there is the Armorer from The Mandalorian, the Children of the Watch, and just the Mandalorians in general. Other Mandalorian characters from Rebels like Fenn Rau could appear, but one of the big ones, and it's a character not too many people know about, is a character named Has Obit, who appears in Catalyst, a Rogue One novel. I've been saying for years, if you've been watching our channel, that Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, to me is the most underrated book in all of canon, especially if you're interested in Andor Season 2 or anything around the Andor, Rogue One, Rebels timeline. Anyway, there's this character named Has Obit, who is one of the big characters of the book. He's an underworld character, a Dracelian smuggler. He directly saves Galen, Lyra, and Jyn from the Separatists, has direct connections to Saw Gerrera, and when captured by Tarkin was even tasked with spying on Krennic for Grand Moff Tarkin. Let's talk about some legacy characters and some other Rogue One characters who could appear, but I think are all very unlikely. Starting with legacy characters who are alive at this time, there's obviously Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, and Luke Skywalker, Owen Lars, Beru Lars. I don't see anything from Owen, Beru, or Luke in this show. I just don't think Tatooine makes much sense. Yoda as well, I don't think makes much sense for this show. Obi-Wan is a character that I would have said made no sense for the show, but because of Obi-Wan now kind of leaving Tatooine every once in a while to help out with Bail Organa and any type of mission that he might have, a direct connection off planet that we didn't know existed really before the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, there's a slim possibility of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'd still say it's like a 1% chance, maybe even less. And then looking at Rogue One, we of course have Jyn Erso, who's the main character of the film. At this point in the timeline, Jyn was involved with the Partisans, but then was left and abandoned by Saw Gerrera when she was younger, and ultimately is captured by the Empire under the pseudonym of Lyanna Halleck. We know that Jyn was abandoned by the Partisans when she was 16, being born in 21 BBY. That would mean when Saw abandoned her, it was somewhere around the 5 BBY to 4 BBY range, which would tie in with season 1 of Andor, or right at the beginning of season 2. So I think it would be a little forced of a cameo to put her in there. Two of the other characters from the main crew of Rogue One who aren't confirmed for the show yet are Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus. Both are members of the Guardians of the Whills. I feel like these two characters would also be a little forced if they made cameos, but it would be really cool to see the Guardians of the Whills in action, the structure of their organization, how it all works. The only other thing I can think of is if we directly see the drilling for kyber crystals on the planet and the Guardians of the Whills take issue with that, then maybe we could see Chirrut and Baze. Okay, that takes me to my final section, which is the expanded universe. Star Wars EU is one of my favorite things to go back to when we look at characters who might be able to be part of these shows. When we look at this show, however, it has such a big cast already. I don't really see us adding anybody too significant to the show, but when you talk about the plot points around the end of the Dark Times, characters who could be involved, there are a few names that come up that you feel like you absolutely have to talk about. The first one to me is Garm Bel Iblis. Garm Bel Iblis is technically canon based on the Star Wars Encyclopedia, but he's never had any type of role in canon, so we'll look at his Legends appearance and basically say he's not canon yet. Bel Iblis was the leader of the Alliance to Restore the Republic and was the representative of his home world of Corellia in both the Republic and Imperial Senates. He was also a skilled military leader and was one of the faces of the early rebellion. If we are connecting Legends at all, this is an essential character to be in this show. Since we haven't really done anything with him yet, I don't necessarily anticipate he'll be in the show, but I think he has one of the best odds of any Legends character who has not been brought into canon yet, or brought into canon in a significant way. Talking about the Force Unleashed, we could see Starkiller. Again, don't think it's likely. I don't think we're getting really any Force stuff. When we talk about what the major plot line of Rogue One is, the Death Star and stealing the Death Star plans and all of that jazz, the main character you think of when you think of the Death Star plans is Kyle Katarn. Kyle Katarn is not part of canon yet in any way, and I don't really anticipate him being in this show at all. In fact, I think it would be kind of a slap in the face to a lot of those fans who don't like the fact that Kyle is now no longer the person who steals the Death Star plans if they brought him in to Andor. Same goes for the intelligence officer Jan Ors. I think Jan has a little bit better chance of showing up than Kyle just because of her involvement in intelligence. You could connect her directly to Cassian in some ways. There's also Rihanna Saren, the main character of the Lethal Alliance video game, who did steal part of the plans to the Death Star as well, and was an acquaintance of Katarn. We could look at Tycho Selchu, another fighter pilot, good friends with Wedge Antilles, one of the main members of Rogue Squadron. Speaking of Tycho, his later wife, Winter, who was raised as a sister character and companion to Leia and eventually became her aide. General Aaron Kraken is another character who can make an appearance. Kian Farlander, the main character of the X-Wing video game. Admiral Natasi Dalla, who was a protege of Grand Moff Tarkin and was originally selected to oversee the Maw installation, where some of the best scientists in the galaxy were working on super weapons for the Empire. You could also use the iconic TIE fighter pilot Baron Soontir Fel. And with Dalla, you can bring in some of the original Legends architects of the Death Star by introducing Bevel Lemelisk and Qui Zooks. Lemelisk was the original Death Star designer, Booster Terek and his daughter Mirax Terek, Dash Rendar, and if we did go to Corellia at all, you could do Hal Horn or Corran Horn. You could also introduce Isan and Armand Isard. The Isard family is one of the elite families of the Imperial Security Bureau, with Armand being the director of Imperial Intelligence. Armand was originally canonized in the book Tarkin by James Luceno, but was also heavily mentioned throughout the Reign of the Empire, the Mask of Fear book, which just came out in February. Maybe the book is setting us up for an appearance of Armand Isard in the show. Isan Isard would be a much less established figure in the Imperial military at this point in the timeline, but another really cool character who they could set up here who could pay dividends in the future if you were to tie her into the New Republic era. And that is everybody. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know who you think has a strong possibility of showing up in the show out of all the characters I listed or didn't list. Let me know some other characters you thought of in the comments below. Please like the video if you haven't. Subscribe to the channel for further Andor coverage. We'll be covering the entire show. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all next time.